ACAC, the Asian Contemporary Art Consortium, was founded in 2010 in San Francisco. Last year was its first Asian ACAW, initials mixed up, which was a huge success. This year we have 19 participating organizations here in the city of San Francisco. ACAC and the participants of the week itself involve museums and collectors, educational institutions, gallerists, scholars across the Bay Area. Today's events are kind of the keystone of the week, and we're really excited about it. So on that note, I want to introduce, I just want to also say, there's 3 important people who are not able to be here today and send their regrets. Jack Wadsworth, Stephen Beal, and Jay Zhu. Stephen Beal is the president of California College of Arts. Jack Wadsworth involved with the Asia Society of Northern California, and Jay is an Asian Art Museum. Those 3 individuals comprise the leadership team of ACAW, and like I said, regret not being here today. So on that note, I want to introduce Xiaoyu Wang, who is the program director for the Asian Arts Consortium, who's done a perfectly remarkable job putting together this extraordinary program over this week. So on that note.
Well, thanks Jennifer for the introduction, and thanks everyone for coming this rainy day. We're not expecting this pouring rain this morning, but I think you will have a great day here. So stick around with us. I would like to first thank you, the CCA and the WADAS, for supporting and generously provide us with the space for this event today. Thank you for joining us today for the daylong event, featuring 4 distinctive presentations by curator N.T. Guerrero, artists James T. Hong, Marianne Ganey, and Ging Hong Sak. I would like to express my deep appreciation in having all 4 of you here from afar and spending time with us in San Francisco. As this year's Asian Contemporary Art Week's highlight program, today's presentation will focus on the speakers' recent projects, each one taking as its point of departure a specific place in Asia: Hong Kong, Zhejiang, Kabul, and Xijing, of which the first 3 are real and the last one is fictive. These practice foreground alternative narratives that bring to light the complex identity of each place and its connections with its surrounding historical and political context. The day-long dialogue serves as an open platform for critical examination of each speaker's practice and geographic specificities that have shaped it. This emphasis on specificity in terms of both the content and the format of the day is intended to relate to a cultural implication of a familiar gesture, dropping a pen on a digital map. With one finger on touch screen, it is possible to effortlessly tap and drop a pin to identify a site and subsequently a variety of possible routes to follow from there. New technologies of tracking and targeting promise this ability to be virtually anywhere and everywhere at any given time. Upon launching the Google Earth application, for example, a simulated effect allows one to freefall from the iconic blue planet Earth image to a street view anywhere on the globe, as if there is no firm ground and all perspectives are relative. The new notion of the globe, encouraged by such technology, invites a reconsideration of the debates surrounding the problems of globalization. The area view, the free fall, and the network of infinite dots have given us a new sense of orientation, or perhaps a refreshing we perceived from everywhere inside out or outside in. The production of time and space are undergoing a constant process of deconstruction and reconstruction, as this multidimensional wholeness is different from the homogeneous abstract space produced by modernism. Instead of assimilating space with existing hierarchical orders, the new sense of globe orientation actually provides multiple angles of focus, non-linear horizons and perspectives. More importantly, groundlessness and and detailization generate an undeniable sense of freedom, pointing to the possibility of shattering existing power structures. Each pain becomes equal, and an equally valid starting point from which new relations and associations may come to light. Today's conversation perhaps is an attempt to offer a few such starting points. It draws our attention to specific locations, zooming in and examining them closely, leading to the recognition of meaningful yet formerly unnoticed connections, alternative paths, and narratives. Each speaker's practice focuses on the reality of a place and links it both to the world at large and to other sites in Asia. Each site is an epicenter itself, and the relationships that emerge operate on varying scales. So I think I'm giving a little bit sort of an abstract of each presentation, and then I'm going to lay out the format of the day. So each presentation will last for about an hour, and each panel will last for about an hour, and each speaker will speak about 30 minutes to 40 minutes, and then we have a respondent who will lead the conversation with the speaker in the audience, and then we have 10 minutes break between each panel. So if you want to grab anything to eat, use the bathroom, or have a drink, please feel free to do it during the break, so we can have the speakers and respondents concentrated on their presentation. And then we have a 2-hour break between 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock, and then we have a film screening which will be introduced separately. Inti Guerrero will introduce his recent curatorial project, A Journal of the Plague Year, Fear, Ghosts, Rebels, SARS, Leslie, and the Hong Kong Story, in which a story about Hong Kong unfolds, connecting a series of landmark events, including the plague of 1894, the Yellow Peril that followed, the SARS crisis of 2003, and denigrating images of mainland Chinese in recent years. The exhibition traced the different narratives and histories and their implications with respect to the cultural and political identity of Hong Kong and beyond. Prop into the lives of villagers in remote area of Zhejiang province in China, filmmaker and artist James T. Hong were examined the aftermath and the haunting effects of Japanese biological warfare during the Second World War. His research is not only an effort to revisit a dark time that complicates Chinese and Japanese history, but more importantly, an investigation of how violence is enacted in the name of rationality. Via photographs and video, the artist Marian Gani will show the explosive growth of Kabul and its accompanying social and political transformations over the course of the 20th century. Through a historical lens, Gani's practice speculates on how past and present phenomena might indicate future possibilities. Finally, the artist Yun Hong Sok will introduce Xijing, literally translated as West Capital, as in an imaginary utopian city created by the collective Xijingmen, consisting of Yun Hong Sok, Chen Shaoshong, and Tsuyoshi Ozawa. It is a proposal in response to the absence of a city in the west of Asia, if we consider Beijing as the north capital, Nanjing as the south capital, and Tokyo as the east capital, which in Chinese pronounces as Dongjing. Yun Hong Sok will introduce Xijing's history, its social, political, and economic structure, the daily activities of its residents, and major civic events such as the Xijing Olympics, the collective activities, humorous self-mockeries of Eastern Asian identity, but they also pose critical questions about how identity is perceived, interrupted, and manipulated. Indeed, there are certainly pitfalls embedded in any attempt to remap geographics. One of them is the ambition to create some kind of inclusive, hermetically sealed totality. Or it might be considered the closest to we can yet to come an actualization of an imagined life-size map. But as fiction approaches a reality, there is a price to pay, as exemplified by the ever-intensifying civic surveillance and the debate surrounding it. Of course, many more pains can be dropped here. There are always more places to be examined and more connections to be made. This day-long program is just one point of departure for a longer-term effort in which art will play an integral role to form a rich volume of synthesized from different narratives and identities. Lastly, I would like to thank 4 of our respondents today who will lead the conversation with the artist and their audience. Abby Chen, curator and artistic director of the Chinese Cultural Foundation of San Francisco. Viet Lei, artist, writer, curator, and assistant professor in the Visual Studies program at California College of the Arts. Lisa Ahmadi, independent curator and writer, educator, who also directs the educational platform Ahmadi Arts and Asian Contemporary Art Week in New York. Christina Lee Podespa, artist, writer, and editor of Philip magazine. And of course, my wonderful team who has worked so hard in putting this together. Thank you.
So I guess I'll start by introducing Inti. Inti Guerrero is an artist, art critic, and traveler. Currently, he's the associate director and curator of Terra Epica. And as an independent curator, he has curated these pathways into collection at Mingsheng Museum in Shanghai, Nana at K Modern, the City of the Naked Man, Museum of Modern Art of Sao Paulo, Flying Down to Earth, Marco, Vigo, and French Orient Nats, and Duet for Cannibals, Royal Tropical Institute in Amsterdam, 2010. His texts have been published in After All, Manifesto Journal, Ramona, Our Nexus, Metropolis, and Narrow. He lives in Hong Kong and periodically works in San Jose, Costa Rica. I admit that I'm kind of reading from the script that I was given, and I was really hoping I could come up with something original by doing some of my own research. But I went to YouTube and I realized that all your lectures are in Spanish. So I couldn't really decipher any of the familiarity. But I'm really curious about what Inti is going to talk about today about this new project in Hong Kong. I myself have a great interest in Hong Kong's cultural landscape, especially post-1997. As Xiao introduced, as a curator and artistic director at Chinese Cultural Foundation, we currently have exhibition actually by Hong Kong artist his Curiosity Box, also about exhibition and creativity. So I welcome all of you to visit the show, but more I want to learn from you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you, Maria, for the invitation. Can you hear me well? No? There? Better? Or should I keep it here?
No, it's okay. It's good.
There, yeah? Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation and the Wattis and also the CCA for also inviting me to teach for the past 2 days at the MA of the Curatorial Practice course. Today, I just wanted to clarify something of the introduction. The project that I'm going to talk to you about is an exhibition that I co-curated along with Cosmin Cosminat, who's the director of Parasite Art Space, which is one of the oldest independent art spaces in Asia, and that opened in 1996. And in Parasite, we co-created this exhibition based somehow after 2 years of now living in Hong Kong. I'm originally from Colombia, but is it okay? Can you hear me? Okay. But I've been working in different contexts, and after, say, 1.5 years of being based most of the time in Hong Kong, through conversations with artists, the context, different cultural practitioners, our own discussions, and life experience, and research within this new context, came up with this exhibition that it's very difficult to place it in the format of a lecture, and I'm going to try to make make a kind of like cut to try to introduce the main core of what was the exhibition. And when you do lectures of exhibition, the idea is not to go like from word to word, but to try to present what was the premises and how the different ramifications of research kind of developed. No? So we basically wanted to make an exhibition on a specific year that was important to understand the contemporaneity of Hong Kong. A year that somehow, because of these conversations with local experts or artists or just people around us, was clearly an important momentum to understand certain issues that were happening in Hong Kong today, not only in the arts but in culture at large. And that year was 2003. As you may have known through news that was happening in 2003, Hong Kong was the epicenter of a huge epidemic that was happening right at the very beginning of the 21st century, the SARS epidemic, which also hit parts of Canada and Taiwan. But Hong Kong was basically almost in quarantine because there was a death toll and great amount of the population was infected. This epidemic in 2003, well, it was a very existentialist moment for the city. And it was very important to understand certain things that still happen today. You know? One of the issues that was quite important to why I speak of an epidemic that happened 10 years ago and why was it relevant to Hong Kong history. There was one specific relationship, and that is that because of the SARS crisis, the economy of Hong Kong basically came down, had a huge crisis, and especially the tourists and the whole investment somehow on the city was almost completely destroyed somehow because people were afraid to come to Hong Kong. You know? And the government had to change, had to do something about it and change its policy to lift the visa restrictions of the mainland Chinese to apply for visas to come to Hong Kong. Before 2003, Chinese from the mainland could only come to Hong Kong by group visas, and there was this whole bureaucratic process to actually try to go there. But since 2003, mainland Chinese could apply for individual visas. You know? And that's how the government attracted and saved the economy. You know? So this was the main direct relationship to understand why SARS is still important to Hong Kong today, because as people perhaps that are here may know, there's a whole tension and anxieties between Hong Kong citizens and mainland China. You know? Now, for that, let's say, that specific relationship, we also wanted to raise yet another anecdote related to this specific year. Another big news that was also existentialist for Hong Kong citizens, and it's also important to understand contemporaneity today in Hong Kong. And that was the death of a huge pop star, which is Leslie Chung, was the image that you see here. This is the cover of an image of a magazine from Malaysia, actually, which juxtaposes the news about SARS in Hong Kong and has the news of the death of Leslie. Leslie Chung was one of the key figures of pop culture in Hong Kong. In the West, I'll show images later in the presentation, widely known for his movies as an actor in Happy Together or Days of Being Wild. In Hong Kong, he's widely known as also as a singer, and he represents, or in that time represented, but still does, a certain identity of Hong Kong. You know? There's a totally hero figure who committed suicide by jumping from the Mandarin Oriental Hotel in Hong Kong in the darkest moment of the SARS crisis. So his death, him being representative of this whole identity, killed himself in a moment of great collective existentialism. So these two factors were like very important for us to try to face the exhibition, and also because SARS in the collective imagery is constantly being used to periodicize even personal life. People would say like, oh, before SARS this happened and after SARS this happened. So it became like this specific date to understand before and after. The exhibition is titled A Journal of the Flakier. We borrowed the name from a book by Daniel Defoe that it speaks and is the testimony of the bubonic plague in London that killed thousands of people. And we also appropriated the name of the journal to structure the exhibition and to understand the exhibition as a journal, where when you see a journal, there are different stories that juxtapose and they are related to each other because of the time and space that they're in. They don't necessarily speak of the same, but they share this momentum. And again, I won't talk about the whole first parts of the exhibition because the idea is to like give it as a format of a lecture, but our format of the show was somehow that these different momentums would be shared in a space, not necessarily speaking of the same thing, but there would be this point of contact zone that I will talk about some of it here. Now, one of those specific segments of the exhibition is just an installation shot for you guys to have an idea. Are you guys hearing me well? Yeah? Okay. All right. There was like a mix of historical archives and artworks and also artifacts by different cultural practitioners. In the most historical part of the show, we wanted to trace how Hong Kong itself has had a different story in relation to epidemics, where SARS was not the only epidemic, but indeed Hong Kong was actually in the British Empire was always known as like an infectious colony, one of the most unhygienic colonies of the British Empire. And in the 19th century, Hong Kong was hit by a huge plague, the bubonic plague, the same plague that had killed for many centuries different societies and peoples in Europe and in America. And this plague was basically had as its epicenter a neighborhood in Hong Kong where Parasite is located. So maybe I'm going to have to shut. The exhibition space, so where we did the show, had this contextual specificity to the context of a former plague, where what the British did to eliminate the plague was basically to burn all the furniture from this Chinese quarter and demolish the complete neighborhood as to cleanse and sanitize this urban space. Now, this plague of the 19th century in Hong Kong is very important for medical history and for world history in general, because scientists from Europe and from Japan went to Hong Kong to research on this plague that they knew that it was the same plague that had been killing so many lives throughout centuries in Europe, but there was now enough apparatus and scientific research to try to find out what caused it. And it was actually in Hong Kong where they found the basilicus that causes the bubonic And that make worldviews, like you can only imagine that after centuries of that, finally in Hong Kong, scientists found the cause of it. You know? And because it made worldviews, that immediately started to associate the disease with Asians and with the Chinese specifically. You know? It created this association as if the plague emerged and came from a specific place in China, and that it had spread throughout the world. Within the exhibition, what we wanted to relate was that the same type of language and rhetoric that media and people back then were addressing plagues was the same kind of language that was used to also address social plagues or social pests. Specifically, this association with disease in Asians may have mirrored as well. Ignore that one for a second. May have mirrored something that is known as the yellow girl. You know? This fear for Asians because of Asian immigration in Europe and in the US and also in Australia and New Zealand for the grand majority of the population that's become a threat. You know? So the same kind of association between physiological and medical pests was appropriated also to address cultural, social pests. You know? And within the exhibition, so photographs of the 19th century like of Hong Kong were right next to images of specific cartoons that were published in newspapers both in America and Europe and in Australia that showed this type of imagery, you know, that represented the Asians, especially Chinese, as not only being medically, physiologically unhygienic, but also morally unhygienic. You know? So that's why you would have all these representations of Chinese as being corrupt, untrustworthy. You know, images that I guess many of you here in the audience are related to. You know? One specific item that we were very interested in was this Fu Manchu novel series where there is this literal relationship between plague and the Chinese. So as you can read from the title, it says here, in her hands was the power to stop the world's deadliest plague. Now, the plague was Fu Manchu, that is corrupt, evil man. Now, in San Francisco also had a plague in the turn of the century, 1900. It is known that it's quite connected to the plague in Hong Kong because of all the travels that were happening between Hong Kong and San Francisco. The plague actually was, although America had all this, let's say, hiding policies in the immigration filter, they didn't know back then that actually plague was being passed by fleas that were inside rats that were also on the ships that were from Hong Kong to the US. So all this Chinese sentiment that had also escalated from the Chinese exclusion law, it had escalated even more in San Francisco because of the plague that was instigated. And this would be the type of yellow pearl iconography that would be published here in San Francisco. You know? So the Chinese must go became like this iconic sentence. You know? And I find all of these images were within the exhibition in a vitrine. You know? And I find it very interesting this one because kind of like the wall now exists between Mexico. But here the wall is used now as in relation to the sphere of the Chinese. Now, within the exhibition title that you get the whole long title of the exhibition, the word fear came as an important subject. Because at the end of the day, what physiological, medical tests, and cultural social tests shared, or how they are addressed, is that there's a fear of contamination, fear of being contaminated either because of a virus, or fear of being contaminated culturally, of fear of otherness, fear of alterity. Now, I'll just show you a video. What I'm going to do with this presentation is that I'll be very contextual in some parts and just show some excerpts of videos that show some of the imagery that was part of the exhibit. So yes, we had a mixture of type of works that were in the show. I'm going to put it like this. I feel so we had a mix of archival works, as you saw the cartoons or the black and white photographs of the bubonic plague. But there was also other type of imagery that we thought that it was important to juxtapose as to through a perhaps more poetic and retinal and visual image relate to this like two spaces that were lagging in relation to, for example, when you saw the photographs of the British Empire burning all the furniture and having this sanitized urban reform in the Chinese quarter. We wanted to include works like the one that you're seeing now from New Zealand, filming from the 1920s, where you see a type of imagery that at first looks like scientist biological imagery, but then as the film goes by, this, let's say, scientific Western imagery becomes Maori indigenous representation. So I think I'll just leave it. So kind of like this dichotomies that were being placed in relation to what the Western British Empire wanted to sanitize, and this vernacular spaces where the plague was happening, with works like Lenlai, the visitor somehow created some kind of this juxtaposition of different ways of representation in cultural images. Also, it was interesting to have this type of work because, as you saw from the beginning, it did feel like at the beginning it was some kind of like a virus, no? Now, to have other works that were more related to specifically to the Yellow Girl and to a more contemporary aspect of it, we also included a work of Li Wang that some of you are related to because part of it was shown at Paris Foundation. Li Wang, for several years, has researched on how Hollywood film throughout 20th century has somehow continued a certain aspect and heritage of this yellow girl representation, where many Chinese characters, female or male, are also portrayed as being morally unhygienic. So again, corrupt, naturally trust, different kind of films showing spies who, or even Asian American policemen who are corrupted within the institution, the femme fatale, Asian spy, also as this evil personas, no? And being wanted, and his work within the show was a collection of different posters of these movies, where there would be, again, all this illness being represented through Asian characters, and then a video of himself where he cross-dressed into two characters, corrupt detective and this femme fatale spy. And the video that he makes is a video where he is chasing himself. I just did it. I'll speak. So he uses this glasses that we saw in the first slide, which were also used in Polanski's Chinatown. And he starts quoting different movies in this very short film. The video is shot in different Chinatowns of San Francisco, LA, and also in different parts of Hong Kong. And because he's chasing himself, as you see the video, you don't know who is chasing whom. There's this ambivalence of who is the bad person. And that ambivalence was important to bring to Hong Kong visitors, because in this tensions between mainland Chinese and Hong Kong, because there's no, let's say, racial difference, the anxieties that are produced between the two peoples are not, it's not racism, it is xenophobia, because it comes from different nations. But because that alterity is visually not distinct, no one knows who is chasing whom somehow. The anxieties are more complex than any other differentiation. So showing this type of film in Hong Kong was important precisely because this ambivalence of who is othering more the other, was being portrayed in this work. A lot of the same type of stereotype representation that the Yellow Peril did in Europe and in the US in relation to Chinese immigrants is the same type of stereotype representation that Hong Kong citizens do to mainland Chinese. As in the Yellow Peril, mainland Chinese are constantly portrayed as uncivilized, the savage, those who cannot, belong to the codes of society of Hong Kong, and this constant stereotype representation becomes more and more violent, both in language or in media. In Hong Kong, for example, very recently, there has been this association of mainland Chinese as being understood as locusts and represented as locusts. When we arrived to Hong Kong, just 3 months after, there was a huge discussion about a specific advertisement, which is the one that you're seeing on this slide, which represented the mainland Chinese coming to Hong Kong as this animal that locusts are pests, that they would suck up the resources of the city. the advertisement alarmed citizens, no, if they are willing to pay a certain amount of taxes so that mainland Chinese would come to suck up, all the money of the city. This again, as I told you at the beginning, is very related to SARS, in a direct manner, because all of these flows of mainland Chinese started after 2003, and in a more symbolic manner, because the way SARS, as any other epidemic, was addressed, the flows of this new immigration is also addressed as if it were an epidemic. There's this fear that they would come in so many amounts, that they would come as a test. That specific association of and fear of a certain humanity and a certain representation of it as being insects, was also associated to a work that we put it here of Neil and James Hong, who is speaking right after me. The video is related to racial anxieties in the US in 2004, while James and you were living in LA. At that time, many newspapers and TV news and even people, their daily life would start to represent Mexicans and talk about Mexicans as ants that would produce in so many amounts that they could become a threat and invade the country. The video that they did together was a very interesting video also for the premise of the exhibition, because like this land-like image, the video starts as a very abstract image that looks also like microbiological imagery. And then as the video goes on, those microorganisms are actually ants. Just like locusts, in this case, it's ants. That is the animal which has this stereotype representation to represent Mexicans. And the fear of immigration is constantly represented as this fear of being invaded or being contaminated physiologically, medically, or culturally. Of course, immigration in the relationship between mainland and Hong Kong is quite different. Not only because of what I just explained, because of the racial ambivalence, the difficulty to have this the visual retinal differentiation, but also because class is also different. The mainland Chinese are not exactly, or there's not so much of an illegal immigration problem, and there's also a lot of middle class mainland Chinese within Hong Kong society, So the complexities within Hong Kong perhaps are layered in a different way, but it was important to show this type of work again because of this constant use of a certain insect, as being constantly this type of imagery to represent that other. Now, having said all this, it was interesting that you said at the beginning that you were interested to understand contemporary culture and art practices that happened after 97. After showing you, most of this beginning of this talk, for us it was quite clear that 2003 might have well been the real handover. No? People argue now that 1997, which is what you're seeing now, was the official political handover of Hong Kong to China, but the cultural and the social real encounter with China happens after 2003. No? That is when the real merging of this big China happens with Hong Kong citizens, because they had to really live together, forced to live together because of the causes of this epidemic. Now, a very specific anxiety that is happening now with mainland Chinese, and it's a world news, and it has to do with the baby formula restrictions that the Hong Kong government has placed for people to take a certain amount of cans of baby formula out of Hong Kong. Perhaps some of you are familiar, and even in Europe there are now restrictions to buy, to sell baby formula to Asians and specifically to Chinese. But in Hong Kong, this has become like a huge restriction, where even when you go to Hong Kong, if you're passing by in a plane and you're at the airport, there are two announcements that are constantly being played at the airport, which they announce, one saying that if you have fever or if you feel sick, you should report to the health authorities, because there's this whole paranoia after SARS and of the bird flu that there might be a new epidemic. So that's one of the announcements at the airport. And the second announcement in the airport is that they remind passengers, we remind passengers that it is not allowed to take out of Hong Kong more than 2 cans of baby milk formula. The reason why this has happened is that since 4 months ago, Hong Kong became paranoid that baby milk formula will have us, what do you call that, scarce, a shortage. Because many Chinese middle-class families who could afford to travel to Hong Kong would buy a certain amount of baby formula and take it back to mainland China, because the baby formula that is sold in mainland China could possibly be contaminated. Now, that happens not only with middle-class Chinese families, but also those who cannot afford it. They would get it from merchants who would come to Hong Kong and buy great quantities and take it back to the mainland. The paranoia of being left without baby milk formula created this restriction, and so since 4 months ago there is this very paradoxical law for Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is widely known for being a city and a port where you can have this free market, where you can buy and sell anything but milk formula. So when we did this exhibition, in a conversation that Cosmin, my co-curator, was having with I Will Wait for another exhibition not related to this, he himself proposed to us that he wanted to make a work about the subject. So, well, at the beginning we were like, can't see it. Okay. We were very skeptical about about the self-invitation, because I Will Wait is such a big name. But the work that he was proposing was interesting and the subject was important for us. And so he made what you can see, a huge map of China made out of baby milk formula, which in itself seems illegal actually to see it, you know, to have. If there's time at the end, I'll show you a video of the whole news about the work, but because I see that there's time, is it 35 or 45? I'm getting confused. 35, okay. There was a specific work segment that had to do with certain performance practices. One very relatable to all the subject that we've been talking about. In 1997, Ricky Young, an artist from Hong Kong, did the specific work for what was going to be the 10 years before the handover, as expressing the fears and the anxieties of society back then of what was a political agreement where citizens were not involved in. He, for 48 hours, was kept inside a cage, roaring and having some catharsis, no? Feeling entrapped in this gallery. He describes and still describes this performance as a direct response to those 10 years before that handover. I want to go about that. I'll just jump, I think, to the other important subject of our exhibition, which is the death of Leslie. The death of Leslie was very important also within SARS because it was the first collective moment that citizens came out in masses in a time where people were basically afraid of being together and having any kind of sociability. So the death of the star had some kind of an optimistic response to the whole crisis because the collective had once again emerged. And I just brought these images for those who don't know or would like to remember Leslie. So Leslie, was this very eccentric figure that had and played different personas and different genders and sexualities in film and in real life. And within the exhibition, we invited 5 fans of Leslie from Hong Kong to show their collections, somehow to show this private, subjective relationship to this figure. The death of Leslie and the funeral and this relationship with the collective also resonated with the other moment where the collective also appeared in times of SARS. Leslie dies in April, so his funeral and the whole masses that went to his funeral happened in April. And then in July, the 1st of July protests in Hong Kong are the protests that are made by the citizens in the day of the celebration of the handover. This is a very interesting image because you can tell in the background it's the official celebration of the handover, but citizens are protesting as pro-democracy, protesting that although they had started before 2003, the protest in 2003 is widely known as being the most massively attended. No? So that protest in the exhibition was also important and represented by another, by different types of works. In this case, Pak Sun-shin, an artist from Hong Kong. What you're seeing is the record of further complex work where he places a piece of cloth on one of the streets where the 1st of July protest passed by. And as protesters would pass by, they would leave their footprints, no? And their marks on this piece of cloth. And then he cut the piece of cloth in different parts and flew to Beijing and left parts of that cloth around the Forbidden City, so as to lead or take the protest to Beijing directly. No? The work is called Present to the Central Government. And sorry, yes. And this is the final slide. I showed you mostly things that were related as to Hong Kong and mainland China or Chinese immigration in the US and Europe. But there were other works that were not specifically from that context, but we wanted to relate it to this whole subject, like the landline from New Zealand, or in this case, we re-performed the performance from Ligia Pape, an artist from Brazil from the 1960s. This is an image of the performance in Hong Kong, and it's basically this huge piece of cloth which is activated by about 150 people in downtown Hong Kong. We had all of these people joining together, activating this work, whose title is quite important for the concept of the piece and of the show. Divisor in Portuguese means the divider, that which divides us between people. And from what you heard from the talk and the images, most of this material, artworks, archival objects, and historical artifacts, they spoke about those situations that differentiated people and divided people in different times of history, from a Hong Kong momentum, but speaking about different situations in different contexts. That's it. I'll just wanted to leave you with a video of the Ai Weiwei, because I think it's important. And we'll just finish like that.
Entirely out of baby milk formula, 1,815 cans to be exact. If you look at some of the brands they've used, though, they're all international labels. These are the most popular ones amongst mainland Chinese tourists when they come to visit Hong Kong. Go to any pharmacy, there are long queues for them. In the lead up to major holidays, especially, there have been at times shortages because they bought so much. That has made a lot of local mothers and Hong Kong residents angry.
即係其中一個佢哋 milk powder is a source of tension we have with mainland Chinese. So to see so many cans of baby formula in the shape of China is very provocative.
สังเกตได้ไหมคะ
Mainland Chinese buying cases of milk powder, and sometimes when they see my sister buying 2 cans, they will also want her share. That's why we get angry.
For many visitors, it's a novelty to see so many cans of baby formula. Milk powder is now a restricted item. Anyone leaving Hong Kong with more than 2 cans is treated as a smuggler. They face fines and even a jail term, but many here believe the mainland Chinese will find ways to bypass the restrictions. Some of these foreign brands
Let's just leave it like that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for wonderful presentation. I think it's super complex to talk about the contemporary culture in Hong Kong, as particularly in the past 10 years, because I think Hong Kong as a region, or known as the island, was close to 7 million people, is experiencing really drastic changes post-1997. And it seems like the political system is really kind of unstable and chaos right now. But on the other hand, as we talk about quarantine and this kind of like real handover that is happening in 2003 with SARS sort of ignite that kind of awareness, it's sort of like starting to have all these independent voices that we never heard before. So it was interesting that you show those kind of like bioscience, like cell sort of images with videos, because I think in bioscience, when things are fermented or when the viruses are developing, there will be coming a period of time you have this sudden mutation. And sometimes there's a special sort of event triggering it, and sometimes it's just time. And I think particularly if we're using that kind of trace of thought to look at Hong Kong, SARS could be one of those kind of sudden mutating events that bring the isolation and quarantine into
And I was talking to quite a few Hong Kong artists, and I think before, I would say before 2000, exactly like 2002, 2003, we really don't see sort of like this contemporary art cohorts or art scene in Hong Kong, but it started to emerge right after that. And I was talking to a bunch of contemporary artists in Hong Kong, and Vicky, who was in your show, I was hoping I can see the image today, was part of that force. And artists like Long Pam and Zhong Fei and Guan Zhengqi, they're all part of that cohort. And they said, and I once wrote an article called The Best of Times. It's about that period of time that when SARS broke out, the very money-driven society as Hong Kong all of a sudden sort of become a dead zone, as you said, that people were so afraid of contaminated. And all of a sudden this money-driven society started to ignore the value of money. And so the issue of identity started to come out, and they had the opportunity actually to rent an art space to start this cohort in Wuhan, as you know, that now has become a cultural phenomenon, that you have so many art studios, independent art studios in that complex right now. And they were able to rent this space as 5 artists just graduated out of university, wanted to become a professional artist and not necessarily taking on a job as a teacher, where most of the artists will do graduating from the art school, to start their studio practice. So it was really a very desperate and depressing time in Hong Kong, although it was a great time for them to sort of start their practice, to be able to afford the very low rent that SARS made possible. So I would like to touch on that in terms of how this quarantine and desperation sort of like fermented a different kind of creativity that we're able to witness today. So that's one thing I would like to touch upon.
Should I reply to that?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I mean, there are different moments before SARS that the contemporary also emerged. So I think that maybe it's difficult to actually make that statement. I understand what you're saying, and I'll just say it from the part that I think is related to understanding that yes, indeed, when SARS happened, this collective existentialism created a situation where at the end of the day, people had nothing else to lose. So that's why the First of July protest in 2003 was the first massively attended, because and that's what you're referring is basically where there is a first political imagery, political imagination, after 97, it only happened in 2003. Because there was nothing to lose, people could actually die. So this specific medical physiological crisis instigated that political conscience. Something maybe in relation to things that were happening before 2003 in relation to the contemporary, and in relation to the death of the Xijing, maybe not even the arts, but in visual culture, specifically in cinema, that last golden age that Wong Kar-wai belonged to and that Xijing belonged to. That is the kind of like a great cultural production for Hong Kong. So it might not be contemporary art, but it was for film. And when Leslie Chung died, symbolically, it felt like that Hong Kong also died. No?
Yes, that the romance and also the free sort of spirit, that sort of like the authenticity that comes with Leslie Chang and Wong Kar-wai's film, sort of like you needed having this very short-term nostalgic moment on this collective conscious.
Yeah. It's actually interesting that you brought Liquid that I didn't talk about, but Liquid, an artist from Hong Kong, he was actually in the segment of the Leslie Chung room where we had all the memorabilia. You don't see it here, but there was a karaoke that he did, and with a song by Leslie Chung, very nostalgic, precisely talking about how a certain Hong Kong clearly died in 2003. A certain identity that made Hong Kong singular, no? Not only singular, but exportable. Because Cantonese music, soap operas, and film were shown in different contexts and societies of Asia, and many subjectivities of generations in Taiwan, including in Japan and Korea, were built up by the cultural production that happened in Hong Kong at a certain moment. No? Well, Hong Kong had different moments of this golden age. No? There's a moment of 40s and 30s, no? But this last one, no? It's a clear momentum that doesn't exist nowadays. No? Nowadays it's just, as in many other places, another side of global capitalism, but obviously Hong Kong has been a core of that global capitalism. No? Within the show, we actually did wanted to show how perhaps that death of Hong Kong had happened even during the life of Leslie, and it was this, by far, there's a huge hypothesis that we had in relation to his role in Farewell My Concubine. Because Farewell My Concubine, you see it to the right, no? Well-known Chinese film, also because it won the Cannes Festival in 1993. Just before the handover, this boy of Hong Kong who had played all the roles of an urban Hong Kong identity, you know, from the bad boy to traditional, but he was the figure, you know, of this place. He plays the role of representing Greater China, and he speaks in Mandarin. You know? So symbolically, it felt like this boy of Hong Kong had the handover. No.
But then at the same time, it's also the movie that he sort of come out of the concept.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's this whole, but if you follow his filmography, yes, there's always this gender ambivalence, and that's why he's this kind of like anti-hero. He's a hero of Hong Kong society, but because he represents the emancipation from different social codes, it's kind of like this very strange particular figure, no? In pop culture.
Yeah.
For those who are not related, perhaps to know the importance of this Zhejiang, CNN actually named him the third most iconic figure in pop culture after Elvis and the Beatles.
Oh.
Yeah, not after Michael Jackson and the Beatles. Yes. If you Google Leslie Chung, you'll see the footnote by CNN. You know. And what's interesting to, I mean, as us being foreigners, it might seem as that we romanticize this figure, but it's quite clear from living in Hong Kong that this figure persists. Because what has happened is that even young generations become his fans. People go to concerts that commemorate his songs being sang by current pop singers. So 13-year-old boys and girls are fans of this ghost, no? And in Cantonese, he actually has a different his name, not as Leslie Chung, but as Kabul, which means Big Brother, no? So there's this whole like paternal brotherly love, no? To this non-existent hero, no?
Also, yeah, it's sort of like, he started off as a bad boy, but later on very fragile.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And it's good that you, it's interesting that you mentioned about this cultural production of Hong Kong, which was really phenomenal for the entire Asia, and probably it was really providing a window to the sort of like this Chinese life to the world that you're not able to see in Taiwan or China. They sort of combine those. And I would say this big cultural production sort of probably started really blossom in the 1960s and 70s with Bruce Lee doing the Kung Fu film, and the fact that he was born in San Francisco, but then really made his name in Hong Kong, and then a lot of what his film was representing is trying to go against the yellow peril, that image. And that's, even today I still find Bruce Lee's a lot of statements were really philosophical, and he's kind of this legendary icon. And then continuously you see Leslie Chang, and this really, I would say, breakthrough film going from Farewell My Concubine, and then later on he did The Happy Together. It's a production of mainland, as we say, that he got handed over by mainland, but it was also the time that he got started by himself, was set free with his sexuality, and was more and more open about his sexuality. And then just comparatively, around that same time, the emergence of another superstar today, the super diva Fei Long, which is sort of this kind of embody this great conflict between mainland and Hong Kong, that people in Hong Kong just were crazy about Fei Long. And this is a singer from Beijing and made her name in Hong Kong, and never afraid to show her strong tie with the mainland. And then at the same time, I really view this complexity about Hong Kong local residents having this really great resentment towards mainland people that is completely changing their social order beyond the ecosystem. For example, mainland visitors are not going to queue up in lines, that they will pee and eat in the subway, and that become a really prime target. This advertising is one, and there's another one that was just plain text by Apple Daily by a bunch of housewives, and just saying that we had enough. This is enough of the lupus.
Maybe I just wanted to react something that you said at the beginning. I like your metaphor of understanding the microbiological as modifying something or instigating something. We had a conversation with a local journalist, and she said that also Hong Kong, it's interesting to see it also as a virus for mainland China in the early 2000s, because it represented a certain freedom, that could also be a fear for the mainland. So it's actually, it works also the other way around. She also was referring to how more and more often people from the mainland actually are more aware of the 1st of July protest, and that would somehow go back and return also like a virus, perhaps.
Right. I think Hong Kong right now sort of represents one of the biggest fear for the Chinese government, just because this great, upheaval that we're seeing. And then I think the previous popular culture production were sort of like really shown the entertainment side of what Hong Kong's industry can bring to us. But then right now, I think Hong Kong has a new sort of image, which is great creativity, but at the same time also inspiration. Every June Falls, this is the only place that holds this largest gathering for the June Falls event. And also, this is the only place where that people have this direct comment collectively towards the central government and also their local government, unless Taiwan, which is a little removed from China's So, which I never end, but we can open up the floor and welcome questions from the audience.
I was thinking about, as we're speaking on Leslie Chung, the idea of mental illness as play, which is something that you did raise, but certainly in much of Asia, suicide and depression are at epidemic levels. And so it struck me both that Chung's death by suicide was another example of a sort of unspoken plague, like mental illness that few wish to acknowledge, and just in many ways, particularly Asian phenomenon, that we suppress that awareness. But the second part of that was also the sort of parallel with another figure, an Asian pop figure, billed as the first Asian pop star, which was Freddie Mercury, who died very publicly of AIDS. And in both of these cases, although you have a figure whose sexuality is in question, who's open to some extent about bisexuality in society that's not comfortable with that, and although that person also dies of a kind of plague that is stigmatized, it's really inspiring in some ways and also helpful to see the outpouring of love that people continue to embrace a figure like Leslie Chung, despite the fact that his narrative is somewhat deviant to the mainstream norm. So I wonder if you could reflect on that.
Yeah, we constantly had conversations relating to Freddie Mercury, also because there's Freddie Mercury fans that are teenagers today, and it's like this ghost that continues to have its fans. In relation to AIDS, we also had a discussion with Cosmic of actually including it or not including it with the exhibition, and we decided not to first, but because Leslie didn't die of AIDS and wouldn't have created like this strange association of the queer martyr always related to this epidemic, but also because that epidemic has all a different cultural layer, which is not the same as the epidemic like SARS or the bubonic plague, which are airborne, or there is no emotional or affect in relation to epidemics like SARS and the bubonic plague, where contamination could be out of anywhere, no? So we consciously decided not to put it, no? Because it would feel like our main interest was to relate physiological, medical tests and social, cultural tests, no? And with AIDS it became like very complex to make that that association. I don't know if I answered all the questions.
I would say that in addition to being epidemic among Asians,
the suicide.
epidemic among transgender youth in particular, and I just think it seems like it's worth a little bit of thought on that.
Well, I think partially, I think accompanied with his suicidal, there's a lot of like what I just mentioned about romance and nostalgic moment. But I have to say, yes, the depression factor was sort of ignored, and is actually a really serious issue right now. I think all over Asia, probably in the world as well, and particularly in mainland. I mean, people use mental illness as a way to put people aside, particularly for political dissidents. But I think particularly in Hong Kong at the time, this was a factor that got largely ignored. People were more focusing on the physical problem because I think he has the stomach issues, and then also his love issues. That depression part wasn't really being discussed largely.
I mean, at the beginning, but nowadays, yes.
Yeah, nowadays, yes. Nowadays, yes.
I honestly, I personally associate depression with Scandinavian. I mean, is it in Sweden the highest?
the body was being contaminated and this fear of that other. But I'm thinking more of the digital media space and how something going viral can be really positive, and the idea that you have this kind of transmission of arguments that can kind of spread in a contagious way, and really taking the agency of that idea.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, what I showed today was, well, mostly based on stereotype visual representation and grammatical violence in relation to the sphere of being contaminated, but I guess the subtext of also the talk is that one shouldn't have fear. No? I mean, what we see in mainstream and in daily life is that there is a constant fear of contamination, but actually we should, well, maybe because I'm a bit of an advocate of anthropophagic cultural cannibalism, no? One should always devour difference, no? I mean, if you're related to the 1920s Brazilian avant-garde, that invitation of devouring cultural difference is basically one should have as the formula of constant identity building, where one builds the self through this mutant state of devouring alterity. No? If this is too abstract, one of the lines of that anthropophagic manifesto says, and maybe some of the students who were in the course 2 days ago at Xijing remember, one of the sentences of that manifesto says, I'm only interested in what is not mine. Law of the anthropophagous man. The invitation is basically to always devour what is outside of the self. No? So this is not to ignore reality. The reality is that racism is experienced everywhere, and racial anxieties or xenophobic anxieties occur in different contexts, through different intensities, and with different kinds of people. No? I mean, it's quite clear that financial crises may catalyze and instigate and accelerate more of those anxieties, no? Because all anti-immigration laws, when there's a financial crisis, they escalate. Well, because there's, let's say, an obvious reason. If there's unemployment, why would there be work for immigrants? No? So that's what happened now in 30s in Europe, and well, xenophobic post 9/11 escalated even more in the West after the financial crisis. No? So all this right-wing phenomenon, anti-immigration speech is quite connected, no, to financial crisis.